Hello, Hashima. This is lesson 102 for Thursday, April 2nd. We are working on classifying triangles. So this is actually something new that we did not go over before we left school, but you should have some background knowledge about triangles in general. So today we're going to work on classifying triangles based on their characteristics. So there are two main ways to classify triangles. The first way is to classify them based on their sides. So obviously triangles all have three sides. As you can see, I've got some examples down here of three different types of triangles. I'm going to show you how to classify them just based on their sides. So the first way is by looking at whether or not all the sides are equal in length. So this is called an equilateral triangle, a triangle that has three congruent sides. Congruent means equal. So in this first triangle, you can see that each of the three sides is only 2 centimeters. So 2, 2, 2, that makes an equilateral triangle. You can remember that because equilateral sounds just like equal. The next kind of triangle is called an isosceles triangle. So if you look at the measurements of this triangle, you've got 3, 3, and 2. So as you can see, two of the sides are the same. If a triangle has two congruent sides, we call that an isosceles triangle. The last type of triangle to classify by its sides is called scalene. A scalene triangle is a triangle that has no congruent sides at all. We know that because if you look at the measurements of the sides, we've got 2, 3, and 4. So none of the sides are equal to each other. So a triangle that has no equal sides is called scalene. Now, in an ideal world, you would obviously be able to just measure the sides with a ruler so that you could see if they're equal in length. In this case, they're labeled for you. So these measurements are referring to the length of the sides. So you've got equilateral, isosceles, and scalene triangles. Now, another way to classify triangles is based on their angles. So obviously the angle is where the two sides meet in that corner. So there are three ways to classify them. They're pretty straightforward because you should already know the three types of angles from 4th grade. You've got acute angles, obtuse angles, and right angles. So if you look at the first triangle here, all three angles are less than 90 degrees. We have 30, 70, and 80. And if you add them all up, they're always going to equal 180. In this case, all three of the angles are less than 90 degrees, so you have an acute triangle. The second triangle, the one in the middle down here, is a right triangle. That's obviously because one of the angles is equal to 90 degrees. Since the total sum of all the angles has to be 180, if you already have one right triangle, there's no way that the other two triangles can be obtuse. So both of the other two, sorry, did I say triangles? Two angles. Both of the remaining two angles have to be acute if you have one right angle. So a right triangle has one right angle and two acute angles. The third type of way to classify a triangle based on its angles is when you have one obtuse angle. Obviously, that makes this called an obtuse triangle. If one of your angles is obtuse, that means that the other two also have to be acute. Because remember, the total sum of the angles of a triangle has to be 180 exactly. So if you already have one angle that's above 90, the other two are going to have to be below 90, less than 90. So anytime you see angles on a triangle, you can measure them with a protractor. Some of them are already labeled, or you can just manually add them up and you'll see that each time it equals 180 degrees. So two ways to classify triangles: by their sides, whether or not the sides are equal in length or not, and by their angles. So let's move on to example A, which should be really straightforward to you. So example A shows 4 different triangles. And the first question says, which figure shows an equilateral triangle? I chose triangle Q because it has 3 equal sides. If you have a ruler at home, you can verify that they're all the same length, but you can pretty much just tell by looking at it that Q has 3 equal sides. Looking at the next one, it says, which figure is an isosceles triangle? Remember, isosceles means two sides with the same length. So that one is S because these two sides right here are equal. The next one asks about angles. Which figure is a right triangle? I chose triangle R because this is a right angle. Then the last question for example A says, which figure is a scalene triangle? I chose triangle T because it has no equal sides. Now, just to be clear, you can classify a triangle in 2 ways. Remember, by its sides and by its angle. So actually, each of these triangles can have 2 classifications or 2 names. So triangle Q here is both an equilateral triangle and an acute triangle because all 3 of these sides are less than 90 degrees. Triangle R is a right triangle and a scalene triangle because none of these sides are equal if you measured them with a ruler. S is an isosceles triangle and an acute triangle because all three of these angles are less than 90 degrees. And T, we already know is scalene, but it's also an acute triangle because none of these angles, actually, is that one above 90? Sorry, I think this is an obtuse triangle because if you look at this top angle here, I think that's more than 90 degrees. But anyways, that's how you can classify them. So they can be classified with two different names. So one based on their sides and one based on their angles. Example B says, Tan drew an isosceles triangle. What is true about the isosceles triangles? So here's the picture of it. The only one that's true for this is B. They have at least two congruent sides. Isosceles means two congruent sides. So A is incorrect because scalene means no congruent sides. C cannot be true because if an isosceles triangle has two equal sides, it cannot have obtuse angles. And D, obviously, all sides are congruent would make it equilateral, which is not the same as isosceles. So today you're going to answer some questions about triangles. If you have questions, please refer back to this page that's posted up on the drive to remind you of the different ways that you can name triangles. And remember, you can name them two ways, one with their sides and one on their angles. So we'll see you on Zoom at some point today, and have a great day.